Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now before I get any further than this opening sentence, I want to explain what the GTX 1630 is and then try and explain why I think it exists. I've been told that it's 1.17 times more powerful than a GTX 1050 and some sources have cited that this is a GT 1030 replacement, offering 3 times the performance. If you look at this card from that perspective, then yeah, it'll make a good upgrade from a 1030 and it'll provide a welcome relief over integrated graphics, especially if you've been stuck with them for the past couple of years. That said, the 1630 is, from my initial and admittedly sparse comparative testing, similar or maybe a little weaker than a 1050 Ti out of the box, at least in games that I tested here. I'll have a full comparison soon, so don't take this as verbatim. The 1630 has a 64-bit bus width and less CUDA cores, though it does have 4 gigs of GDDR6 memory. I've heard talks of a $150 price tag, but that's model dependent of course, though this is without a doubt an entry level part that needs to come in at a lower price point. Hopefully with the market returning to normal, that isn't too much of an ask for the not too distant future. The model I have here is the Palit Dual 1630, very kindly provided by Palit themselves. I like the design. It's simple and sleek, compact, and it features 2 DisplayPort connectors and 1 HDMI port. There's a single 6-pin connector on this 75-watt card, but with a suggested system power supply of 300 watts, it might be ideal for aging old pre-builts with questionable PSUs. This Palit one also runs silently under low load because the fans switch off, and even when they spin up they're borderline inaudible. The size of the card means that it will fit into a wide range of computer cases. If you want a 1630 and have a 6-pin connector dangling off that old power supply of yours, you can't go wrong with this model, but I can't sit here and pretend like the 1630 as a whole makes too much sense. Maybe Nvidia originally intended to release it earlier as sort of a pressure reliever during the height of the chip shortage and the mining stuff. Nothing special, but it might have given gamers on a budget something to work with. Miners might have avoided it, sure, though as a company you also need to make sure you don't make something so bad that even gamers don't want it. Thankfully that isn't the case here, not entirely. We've got shadow play support, so gameplay can be recorded internally using GeForce Experience, ideal for budding content creators. The card is PCIe 3.0 x 16, so it's not crippled by certain setups, and for 1080p gaming, well, it's not terrible. It's a Turing card, so no DLSS or ray tracing as you might expect, though even if ray tracing was supported, your frame rate would probably drop through the floor, so it would be pointless. First up is Cyberpunk 2077, and we have FSR to thank for the playable frame rate here. Don't get me wrong, the game does okay at native 1080p, but with the FSR mode set to quality and the rest of the graphical options set to low, well, it certainly helps us achieve a plus 30 FPS experience, especially in busier areas like downtown Night City, where with a native resolution, the frame rate will once again suffer quite a bit. I can see that this card is seemingly on par with the likes of a 1050 Ti. As I mentioned before, I'll have some more in-depth testing soon. But if you were coming from integrated graphics or even a 1030, it would be a nice upgrade, but the price, it needs to be lower. Elden Ring would certainly benefit from the use of NIS or Nvidia Image Scaling, which can be accessed through the GeForce Experience app on PC. What you can do is set the output resolution to that of a lower one than your native display, and then the game will be upscaled using a bunch of complicated algorithms that I'm not going to pretend to understand. This can improve certain games, but I have noticed in Elden Ring that it doesn't quite look as good as it does in other titles, but it is certainly helpful. With that said, I have left it off here, though you'll notice some dips towards the low 30s, so maybe I should have enabled it after all. Far Cry 6 is another title that benefits heavily from AMD FSR. Here it was set to quality mode, I believe, if I remember correctly, and we are using fairly low in-game settings, but it still looks pretty good and I'm pretty happy with the result. It's always worth considering what other options are on the market. Look at used prices of 1050 Ti's, for example, and look at the cost of 1650s, which will probably perform better than this. The 1630 does slot into a space on the market, but it's one that I'm not sure really needed to be filled, because if we look at options like the 1050 Ti, you can still buy them new, but the used market, well, prices are dropping now, and it's always worth considering what else there is instead of rushing out and buying the latest thing. Having said that though, if you do want one of these, you are coming from integrated graphics. I can't sit here and say that it's not going to give you a nice performance boost, because it will, but the price should definitely be a little bit lower than what I'm expecting it to be. If you're looking to play Fortnite, well, it runs with over 60 frames per second. With the low preset here, temporal anti-aliasing was also enabled, and the view distance was set to far, just so that we can see any sneaky enemies trying to hide somewhere in the distance. As per usual, there might be a few dips here and there, but I found that Fortnite actually ran better on DX11 mode instead of DX12, but if you want to squeeze a few more frames out of it, you could always choose the performance mode as well, which will make the graphics look awful, but it will mean that you might remain a little more competitive. That said, there's no cause for concern with any of the figures here today with this game. Here we have Forza Horizon 5. You've seen the comparative results at the start of this video in comparison to the 1050 Ti, but that's not to say that the results here weren't still okay in their own right. If you want to play Forza Horizon 5 on the 1630, you can still do so, and the result will be respectable. The average 1% and 0.1% lows are all acceptable in my opinion, but as I've mentioned before, there are other options around that should be considered. GTA San Andreas, the definitive edition, as with the other games in the trilogy, Vice City and GTA 3, will run with at least 60 FPS though. As expected, there will be a few dips and drops. This is more to do with the game itself as opposed to the graphics card, because I've always had a few minor issues with these titles. It is much improved since it was first launched now. It's far smoother to play on a wider range of hardware, and that's no exception really on the 1630, albeit aside from a few problems with the 0.1% figure. The more you play though, the more it seems to even itself out, and GTA San Andreas, the definitive edition, is playable on this card, and I think it's worth picking up now that a lot of the bug fixes have been implemented. Another GTA game now, GTA 5, the classic. This also runs absolutely fine with the high quality settings. All the advanced options were switched off. MSAA was also off, and we are hitting at least 80 frames per second here with respectable 1 and 0.1% lows, though at this point in time GTA 5 will run on a potato, providing that potato is paired with a solid quad-core processor. This is certainly quite a CPU-intensive title. I've seen it do some crazy things in terms of visual bugs with dual-core processors, but providing you've got a solid 4-core chip, then it's going to be fine in pairing with something like the 1630, and there's not really much else to say. Finally then, it's Red Dead Redemption 2. It feels like just yesterday I tested this with the 1050 Ti, where we had to set the resolution scaling to 80% for the best performance. I did the same thing here. So in terms of output quality, we're looking at sort of similar to Xbox One S. Yeah, it runs with at least 30 frames per second, so you're getting a better frame rate than you would on that console, but things are sort of just as blurry. I think you could implement Nvidia NIS here, or image scaling, to actually upscale it and achieve a similar result, so that's worth thinking about as well. Overall, the GTX 1630, well, it can game at 1080p, it's okay, but I don't really understand why it exists. It's sort of filling a gap that I'm not really sure needs to be filled, and you might want to consider a used 1050 Ti or a new 1650 if you can find one for less than the launch price of this. On a separate note, this actual card, this Palit version of the card, well, I'm very happy with it. It's silent under low load, almost silent under heavy load, and it barely exceeds 60 degrees, so thanks to Palit for providing this one for the review. That's all there is to it. As a GT 1030 successor, yes, it makes some improvements, but if you're looking to replace something like a 1050 Ti, you're not really gaining anything. In fact, you might be going the opposite way. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know what you think of the car down below in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.